Sure, I wasn't going to let my pieces explode. So I finished, believe it or not. It was hard. It was tough sometimes, but Jim was always there for us. You all know that when we needed him. And he was very willing to tell us when something wasn't working, where to lead so we could finish. And there is him hugging me. So life came full circle, because then he was able to hug somebody from his students when he was so frozen when I came. So, so much has been said, and you once told me that this group, those generations were special. But if you believe in the secret, the power of attraction, all that theory, I do believe that that's not coincidental. I think you attract who you are. And your legacy is right in front of you. I thank you for your patience, because I wasn't, the genius out of India or whatever. So you really helped me a lot, and I made it. So thank you much.
You did really well. I did not have to use the hook. So next we're going to have Joe Nibbler, who is one of Jim's colleagues.
We don't have to hear from you.
So just question, have you had enough wine? Okay.
Oh boy. Well, this is really a treat, seeing all of you students, if I remember, and I hadn't really prepared anything, so this I'm going to wing it a little bit. I do remember this guy over here when he first came. I mean, he was amazing. I remember seeing him in the hall thinking, God, that must be one of the new students. And I was wondering what kind of quality we were bringing in these days, because I heard he was from Michigan somewhere, Michigan State, I think it was. So there was some concern about that. Anyway, we had a lot of fun over the years, Jim and I. He was a great colleague, he really was. And he had an amazing program. You guys all are good evidence of that. I enjoyed having a peripheral connection in that I had probably half of you in spectroscopy courses and whatnot, and the views you were there. And I got this story about the Frank Condon effect. Some of you have heard, which I had totally forgotten about. And that was pretty good. Anyway, Jim has been also a lot of fun, not only as a colleague, but as a friend. One of our activities that we still engage in, perhaps some of you know, is every year a group of us, Carol DeCock and Jim and I and 3 others, go off skiing for a week somewhere. And Jim, I want you to know, is a natural athlete. You've probably all seen this over the years. So Jim leads us as we go down these death-defying slopes and things of this sort. He has an uncanny instinct in finding his way around the slope, and we usually get back by the end of the day. The place that we're staying. Jim is also exceptionally talented. Probably you've seen this as a cook, and one of the joys of this outing that we have each year is Jim comes up with these concoctions that we all partake of. And he also is pretty good about wines. He brings quite a few of those, and they're usually of high quality. Now, the only thing about Jim, though, that I would say is maybe defective, is he's not very neat. And I don't know if any of you have had a chance to go back to your laboratory to see your previous station or anything. Jim probably barred the doors on that. But Jim, you really need to get in there and do a little cleaning, I'd say, in your laboratory. And maybe at the end of the session here, you could bring all your students on in to give you a hand. You could all take a souvenir or two away. That would be good. Anyway, Jim and Sally, Sarah have been wonderful colleagues and friends, and I'm delighted to be able to participate in this. So, thank you.
Thanks, John.
So now it is Sally and Lucy have a presentation to give to Jim. And then we're gonna open it up for anyone to come up.
Thanks, Marcia. I told Lucy she had to do this.
Hello, everyone. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I see a lot of faces that I remember from when I was more of a much smaller size. I've heard through the evening that I'm the one that's aged the most. I'm not sure how fair that is.
Let the rest of us have it.
Yes, thank you.
Reasonable to me.
Thank you for taking on that. We needed that. But anyway, I wanted to, or the three of us, my mother and my husband Todd and I, wanted to announce, I guess, that we have established a chemistry scholarship fund, a James D. Ingle Chemistry Scholarship Fund. And so, partly in collaboration with my dad, this is for talented and needy junior or seniors to focus more energy toward their studies during academically rigorous time. So if students are busy with work, and this may allow them to not work as much and focus on their studies. And I dropped that. Hope no one needs it. It's a remote.
Oh, the remote without batteries now.
I'll fix that.
Oh, great. Tom's on.
Don't know anything about chemistry practice with batteries in a remote.
Sorry, I actually forgot Corey because I didn't overlap with Corey. Corey and his wife Daphne are one of the last graduate students. So they have some thoughts about Jim.
Hi everybody, I'm Daphne Cook. I was one of the last PhD students of Jim Ingle.
That's actually the last.
Yeah, he was the last. We have many stories, but we're just going to stick to the most memorable ones tonight. I could go on and on about how wonderful time I had when I was writing my thesis, but maybe I don't want to talk about that much. But what I really want to say is, I want to thank Jim because I learned so much through that experience, and I just benefited so much from it in my career.
I think I actually got off the hook really easy. So my thesis was under 300 pages, which for the Ingle Lab is short. But I do remember there was at least one sentence I think we edited so many times that it ended up being exactly the same as what I started.
I think Jim and I had a very special way of communicating. One day, a graduate student from Remschel's lab came to me and said, "Why are you guys arguing all the time in the lab?" And I looked at her, "It's just my daily report to Dr. Ingle." and now I know, because Jim really cared about his students, and he challenged them in every way he can.
Jim himself might have been a little bit challenged. I don't think I'd call him the absent-minded professor. He's too thoughtful and analytical for that. But he was absent-minded enough that he always had his name written on the bottom of his coffee cup. And I think he spent maybe an hour a week looking for it.
And I think one of the greatest qualities of Jim is his professionalism. For 3 years, Corey and I, his students, were dating, and he had no idea. And, we hoped over time, he'll figure it out like everybody else, but he didn't. And so the longer we waited, the longer, the harder it became to talk about it. And after my graduation, Sarah and Jim invited me to dinner, and I brought Corey as my guest, thinking he's gonna get the hint tonight. He didn't, and so we had to tell him. And I will never forget, how surprised and happy he was.
No, I don't think he ever noticed that I joined the group pretty much to flirt with Daphne. During group meetings.
That's the only reason?
That's not the only reason. I mean, actually, if it weren't for you, we wouldn't have found our way to Corvallis. It is about that power of attraction. And, you brought us here, you brought us to OSU, we met each other, we fell in love with Corvallis, and without Jim and Sally, we wouldn't have had a wedding reception. They had our wedding reception for us. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry, Corey and Daphne, I feel bad. But we'd like to open it up. I know some people had told me that they had some things that they wanted to bring up this evening, so. Anybody? Didn't you know? I think Bob, yeah.
Bob's got a good memory.
Corey makes stuff up.
So good evening. My name is Bob Eierman. I'm not actually an Ingleista. I was a Pietmeyerista. I worked for Pietmeyer, but I came here in the late 70s along with quite a few people here who became known as the Fraternity of Analytical Chemists, or the Friday Afternoon Club, which was a group that met at the bar every Friday afternoon. And Jim was an important part of our development, and I know that this was touted as a roast. When I got to Oregon State, Jim roasted me. I mean, that's all there is to it. I took his Chemistry 520 class, and it was a disaster. Just about the time I started thinking I was starting to get the stuff, here would come the signal-to-noise ratios. And it pounded me, and it confused me, and it took me out. So I'm going to try and repay just a little bit of that tonight. One of the recollections I wanted to bring up, and there's a great photograph that goes with this, but the photograph isn't here tonight, so I'm going to try and paint a word picture for you. And this happened with a guy named Dwayne Chase, who many of us remember, who was one of Jim's graduate students. And the story is that Dwayne graduated after much pain, and Jim had a party at his house for Dwayne, as he frequently does for his graduating students. And at the party, we're going through the party, we're in the backyard, and Dwayne says, "All right, I want everybody to come to attention here." And he says, "Now, I have given Jim a lot of trouble through the years. I've given him lots of pain. And so I want to give him a chance to repay me for that pain." And he reached into a box and pulled out a pie. And so he said, "I'm going to let Jim hit me in the face with this pie." And he handed the pie to Jim. Jim was beaming. I mean, this is a big moment. I get to hit Dwayne Chase in the face with a pie. And Dwayne says, but, Jim also gave me a lot of pain, too. In this moment, my heart started to soar, because I had been roasted by Jim, so I knew this is good stuff. And he reached into the box, and he had a second pie. He said, "At the same time, I'm going to hit Jim in the face with a pie." So these two rivals, these two colleagues, grab each other by the forearm, and a pie was right here. And there was a 1, 2, 3, and the pie just flew. And there's a photograph, and Collins confirmed, I remember this, with the pies hitting the face, and the cream and stuff going back past each head. It was a golden moment. I mean, it really was. And after being roasted by Jim in 520, I thought, this is a good moment. I like it very much. So when I left Oregon State, I became a chemistry professor, and I hope I've followed a little bit in Jim's footsteps, and Joe's and some of the other faculty members, John Westall, who's here tonight as well. And as I went through my career, I interacted with some of the great and near great analytical chemists in the world. And one night in Chicago, at the National ACS meeting in Chicago, I ended up at the 30th floor of Swiss Hotel, which is right down where Michigan Avenue, where the Chicago River goes into the Lake Michigan, at the analytical chemistry banquet. And we were at the banquet, and it was quite a night, because at this banquet, while we were getting ready to sit down, everybody's having cocktails, a huge thunderstorm came in off of Lake Michigan. And so I've never been in a 30-story glass wall building before when a thunderstorm came in. So we were all sitting, this is kind of interesting, this huge storm is coming in, and we're having our wine and stuff, and we make our way to our tables. And pretty soon the storm hits, and the wind is blowing in the thing, and the window pops open, and the rain pours in, and the waiters all run over and shut the window, and another window pops open, and rain comes through the roof. I mean, the building was failing, and we were all sitting there. It's like, so, you know, this is like the great analytical chemist, and I ended up sitting at a table next to a guy named Stanley Crouch. And Stanley Crouch is, for those of us who were in that era, was amongst the gods of analytical chemistry, partly because the book, the instrumentation book that we all learned from, is Malmsted, Encke, and Crouch. And so I sat with Stan Crouch, and come to find out, Stan Crouch was Jim's graduate advisor in graduate school, and he began telling me stories, and his wife was there, and we had this really memorable evening with this building failing and the whole this crap going on, and he's telling me stories about Jim Ingle. So as this event started coming, I thought, you know, I wonder if Stan Crouch remembers me. I'm just a, you know, primarily undergraduate guy, but he, you know, I thought, maybe I should get a hold of Stan and see if he'd like to contribute to this evening. And I got a hold of him by email through Michigan State, and indeed Stan Crouch did want to contribute to this evening. So I have a little something that he wrote, and I thought I should read this at this time. So pull out my glasses, 'cause the days when I could see are gone. And so this is written by Stanley Crouch. I told my daughters that I met a guy named Stanley Crouch, and they went, Stanley Crouch? It sounds like a character from Harry Potter. If you've ever seen Stanley Crouch, he's a short guy with a little goatee, kind of a Burl Ives sort of guy. He looks like a character from Harry Potter. So, on the retirement of James D. Ingle Jr., let me first congratulate Jim on his wonderful career in teaching, research, and service at Oregon State University. I have been asked to share a few stories about Jim that I have accrued over the many years I have known him. I will not bore you of the stories of Jim's undergraduate days at Illinois or his graduate days at Michigan State, where he went to and slept through his first Pittsburgh conference in Cleveland. No, it seems appropriate for me to concentrate on Jim days as a professor at OSU. Let me preface this by calling these the saga of the absent-minded professor. So even though you weren't willing, Corey, we're going there. The first story takes place, again, at a conference shortly after Jim joined the faculty at OSU. He and I were sharing a room in either Atlantic City or New York. The memory banks seemed fuzzy at this point. Jim had given his talk and was set to return to Corvallis. I had to stay an extra day due to the late scheduling of my talk. Remember this, Jim? Here we go. Jim was all well packed and ready to roll, except that he couldn't find his plane ticket. He then began to scour the known Roomiverse for his lost ticket. At the time I left to give my talk, Jim was still searching. I don't know how he got back to Oregon, but he wasn't in the hotel room when I returned, so I must have been away. Maybe he can tell the story. The second story took place when Jim was on sabbatical at Lawrence Livermore. He would spend a week at Livermore and then fly home on the weekends to be with Sarah, we called her Sally, and Lucy. Jim was scheduled with a plane ticket safely in hand to fly from San Francisco to Portland, where Sally was to meet him. He calmly boarded the flight, took his seat, and then began to edit his latest paper. About an hour later, the pilot came over the intercom with an announcement that they would soon begin their descent into the Los Angeles area. Los Angeles, the passenger was heard to scream, "I'm going to Portland!" Apparently, the two United flights boarded the adjacent to one another about the same time, and somehow they hadn't checked his boarding pass carefully, and he was allowed on the LA flight. United agreed that it was their flight and flew him on to Portland, albeit a few hours late. This being before cell phones, that meant that there was little opportunity to let Sally know of his predicament. The final story has to do with the wedding of Stan and Mickey Crouch.
Oh, yeah.
Jim agreed to participate. Just Sally remembers this one. Jim agreed to participate in the happy affair which took place in Fresno in the December of 1990. The Ingle family drove from Corvallis with an intermediate stop in Santa Rosa, where Jim's parents were living. After spending the night there, they proceeded onward for the 5-hour jaunt to Fresno, arriving in plenty of time for the rehearsal dinner, and other pre-wedding festivities. However, on arriving at the hotel in Fresno, Jim discovered that he had left his suitcase with all his goodies back in Santa Rosa. With the rehearsal imminent, there was no time for him to make the trip back, so Sally drove 5 hours back to retrieve the forgotten suitcase and another 5 hours to return. Stan, you're a cruel man. In the end, everything seemed to work, and the happy couple said their vows. Good times and a few yucks were had by all. Perhaps except for Sally. Thus ended the saga of the absent-minded professor. Needless to say, there are many other stories that could be told. For the sake of brevity, the other stories will have to wait for another occasion. And again, let me congratulate Jim and his wonderful wife, Sally, on a great career, which would have been nicer had we not started the sales of spectrochemical analysis in the hole because of too many figures. Stanley Crouch. I'll give this to you just in case you want.
Sally, 5 hours